everyone, Alexa Dunn here, and today I'm going to tell you how to format your dialogue tags correctly, which I know sounds like the world's most boring topic, but it is so essential to your writing. This is an essential bit of craft that a lot of writers get really wrong. Full disclosure, I myself did not know how to properly do dialogue tags until one of my beta readers back when I was writing fan fiction, took me to task for doing them all wrong. I was doing them all wrong. And I was past college. I'd graduated from college at this point, and I was like, no, you're wrong, because I know grammar, I know stuff. There's no way I'm doing dialogue tags wrong. And I was 100% doing dialogue tags wrong. And I tell you this to say that it's actually really normal that you wouldn't organically know how to do this. They don't really teach you how to do it in school. It isn't part of like a formal, normal English education, because when they're teaching you grammar and whatnot in English, they're not teaching you how to write dialogue scenes in fiction. Like, it just doesn't come up that much. Perhaps if you're a creative writing major, you learned this, but so I learned it on the streets writing fan fiction. So I'm going to tell you some of the common mistakes that writers make with their dialogue tags and the very straightforward rules you need to know in order to fix them. Now, why does it matter to fix your dialogue tags? Because I'm going to show you some examples of what is wrong, and you're probably going to be like, but Alexa, it's not even that big of a deal. Who cares if the comma isn't in the right place, or, I use, verbs other than said. What does it really matter? So at best, I'll tell you, it is just a minor annoyance to people like me and other readers who actually know what the proper format is. But at worst, it can really annoy a reader to the point that they stop reading, or importantly, an agent to the point where they say no. Using the proper dialogue tag formatting and just good dialogue tags, which I'm going to talk about there's formatting, and then there's just best practices for your dialogue tags. They both go together. It's just a matter of sophistication level of your craft and your prose. And if you work on these things, you're just going to have better prose, better craft, better writing, and it's just going to serve you really well in your writing journey and career. So first thing is first, do not be afraid of said. You can use said as in she said, he said, I said, whatever. You can use said until the cows come home. You, in fact, should be using it 80 to 90% of the time in your prose. It is the universal dialogue tag, and it's the invisible dialogue tag. It is easy to just kind of read. Readers are so used to said, and said is such a basic, very good and versatile dialogue tag that readers always just kind of gloss over it. So you're identifying who is speaking, but without distracting the reader. So 90% of the time, please use said. It is a novice mistake, and I can always pick it out in writers, and I know that you write fan fiction. I know that you do, because I did, and I did this too, where someone, every other line, instead of he said or she said, it's he ejaculated, he whispered, he yelled, he said shrilly. I mean, that you're still using said, but oh, those adverbs, watch out for those adverbs. But it's just a telltale sign when you have a writer who is getting creative with their dialogue tags, and it's anything but a basic he said or she said or I said. When you're just adding on the description and the purple prose, it comes across as novice writing because you are overcompensating for other areas in your writing, essentially. If you have to describe how someone says something all of the time, you are probably not showing enough in your writing or communicating tone or action well in other ways. And as I said is the invisible word. You don't want to have your readers constantly tripping up over the word. So using anything other than said, especially if you're doing it for every single instance, that is going to do that. It trips up your reader, and that's the last thing that you want. So just seriously, just use said. Next, I'm going to talk about commas. Aren't you so excited to talk about commas? Not just commas, but commas and any punctuation that is in your dialogue tag that involves your quotation marks. So the rule of thumb, always put the punctuation inside the quotation marks. This obviously is going to concern your closing quotation mark. That is the magic quotation mark. So, for example, and I'm going to put the sample sentences right down here on the screen so you can see what's wrong and what's right, and I will put the incorrect thing in a nice bright red so that you can see it. So, for example, in the sentence, "Well, that's awful," she said. You see that little red comma that I've got outside the quotation mark? It makes me want to don't do this. Do not put it outside the quotation mark. Or if it were a question, it would be the same thing. Can you do that? That question mark is inside the quotation mark. Now, of course, if you remember your grammar rules, there are weird cases where you are going to have punctuation outside of quotation mark, but that has to do with all sorts of quotations within quotations and all sorts of stuff. But 99.9% of the time in fiction, when you are writing dialogue in a scene, you're going to follow the standard rule. So put that punctuation inside the quotation mark. Now, tied to that is what you're going to do after the quotation mark with your dialogue tag. So did you notice how that she is lowercase? That is because the dialogue and the she said are connected together, and it's a dialogue tag. Anytime you use a dialogue tag, and only dialogue tags, which I'm going to get into the details in a minute, you are always going to have the she or the he or whatever word it is lowercase, because it is connected to it's a continuation of the dialogue, which is a sentence. Basically, you are not going to capitalize what I call a dialogue verb because it is all part of the same sentence. It is a continuation of the same sentence that you've got someone saying with your quotation mark. So, lowercase. A really, really common mistake that I see is writers using action tags instead of dialogue tags and connecting those action tags to the dialogue as if they're dialogue tags, i.e. speaking verbs. Are you confused yet? It is confusing, except once you learn it, it is not. So if you have your character saying something and then the next sentence is an action that is performed that has nothing to do with what they said. So, for example, "Well, that's awful." She got up from her chair. "Well, that's awful" is the thing that she said, but her getting up from her chair has nothing to do with the stuff that she was saying. Now, you could say, "Well, that's awful, comma, quotation mark, she said, comma, getting up from her chair." That's fine because you have the she said in there. But you cannot conflate a piece of action with the dialogue. The action is always going to be a separate and new sentence, started with a capital, as you do start new sentences. So yeah, as I mentioned, this is a huge novice mistake I see a lot. Writers who, they know the grammar rule of, okay, the next word is lowercase because it's dialogue, I've got my comma, lowercase, but they do it with an action, and that is wrong. Now, speaking of all of these dialogue tags and action tags and punctuation, you don't actually always have to have a dialogue tag or even an action tag after every line of dialogue. Now, you can't have none because if you just have a bunch of sentences, we have no idea who's saying the sentences or what's happening while they're saying them. You need to have something to kind of ground your reader throughout a conversation. But if you have a line on every single line of dialogue, it can actually, again, trip a reader up. Even if you are using the invisible verb, said, even said sometimes can be too much. So when you're writing a scene with dialogue, kind of depending on how many speakers there are in the scene, to be fair, if you have only 2 speakers and the reader knows there's only 2 speakers, you can get away with far fewer tags because it's not as confusing to keep track of who is speaking. You just kind of touch base every once in a while. You can also sometimes have context clues so people know who is speaking. And you want to kind of go with your gut when it comes to flow of dialogue and conversation. Read over it. If you get confused at any point about who is speaking, you need a tag. If you have dialogue tags, like the speaking verb tags, like he said, she said, but you realize the characters might as well be sitting in a white room talking back and forth at each other. And I have a whole video on white room syndrome, and I mentioned this in that video because this is another thing that a lot of people do. That is when you do need action tags, action descriptions. You need touch tones throughout a dialogue so that readers have a sense of what the characters are actually doing or thinking or feeling in addition to what they are saying. So any dialogue scene is a delicate balance of all these things, but from a grammar point of view, it's all about putting that punctuation in the right place, capitalizing or not capitalizing the correct things, and just, yeah, please, for the love of God, you said 90% of the time. That way, when you do occasionally use like a whisper or shout or cried, it has a lot more impact because you're not essentially doing the purple prose version of dialogue tags. And the purple prose version of dialogue tags is to use anything but sad at all times at the end of every single sentence. So just keep these things in mind for properly formatting your dialogue tags and having clean and interesting prose in your dialogue scenes. So let me know if you have any questions down below about dialogue tags specifically. I will include some examples, just a couple down below in the description for this video as well, in addition to the things that appear on screen as I have been talking. And, sorry for the weirdness of my sentences. I don't know why I thought, well, that's awful, but hey, it illustrates a point. Hit me up with really any other questions. Are there other weird craft format grammar-y things that come up in novels that you're curious about? I'm happy to go over anything you want, except don't ask me about sparsely using commas because I love commas, so I use a ton of them. But other than that, I'm happy to talk about almost any grammar thing. But grammar's not that sexy. If you have any prose or craft related questions, drop them down below because I love making craft videos and I'm always looking for new things to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this helped. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up because it lets me know that you also like the craft videos. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be notified anytime I post a video. I post 2 to 3 times a week, and as always, everyone, happy writing.